You are a worthless, lonely joke. How is being a barren failure? My father spat those words at me across a table covered in pristine white linen, fine bone china, and half-empty glasses of wildly expensive vintage champagne. He did not whisper them softly under his breath. He did not say them in passing while pretending to clear his throat. He leaned forward, gripping his heavy crystal glass so tightly his knuckles turned a sharp, bloodless white, and he aimed his voice to cut clearly and deliberately through the quiet, sophisticated murmur of 25 invited guests. The silence that followed his words dropped like a physical lead weight from the ceiling, suffocating the entire room in a matter of a single heartbeat. It was supposed to be a joyous celebration. The 35th wedding anniversary of my parents, Orson and Delphine Gallagher. We were gathered at La Toile, arguably the most exclusive and notoriously overpriced French restaurant in the affluent suburb of Oak Park. It was the kind of establishment where the grand crystal chandeliers looked like frozen, cascading waterfalls, where the waiters moved silently like well-dressed ghosts, and where a simple appetizer cost more than what most people made in a day. I was the one who had meticulously researched and booked the private dining room 6 months in advance. I was the one who had carefully curated the decadent 5-course tasting menu, ensuring every dietary restriction of his pompous golf club friends was met. And sitting heavily in my designer leather purse, resting against my leg, was the very corporate credit card that was about to pay the staggering $4,000 bill for this exact dinner. I am 34 years old. I am the Vice President of Commercial Real Estate Acquisitions at a rapidly growing, mid-sized firm located in the beating heart of downtown Chicago. I have spent the better part of a grueling decade building a serious career out of thin air. I clawed my way up from the dirt, skipping parties, ignoring holidays, making calculated financial decisions that move millions of dollars before most people even pour their morning coffee. Yet, sitting in that plush velvet chair, feeling the sudden, searing heat of 25 pairs of eyes locking onto me, I was violently and effortlessly shoved back into the suffocating role I was born into. The invisible, unlovable daughter. The family workhorse. I looked slowly around my family. My mother, Delphine, sat rigid beside my father. She was wearing a stunning, custom-tailored emerald silk dress. It was a dress that I had personally purchased for her just 2 weeks prior because she had called me, weeping quietly, complaining she had nothing elegant enough to wear around Orson's wealthy friends. Did she stand up for me now? Did she place a gentle hand on her husband's arm and tell him to stop? Did she show even a fraction of maternal instinct? No. She simply squeezed her eyes tightly shut, bowed her head, and twisted her expensive linen napkin into a tight, agonizing knot in her lap. She chose silence. She always, without fail, chose silence. To my left sat my younger sisters, the twin, shining pillars of my father's immense pride. Fallon, 31 years old, the self-proclaimed CEO and owner of a failing suburban fashion boutique she delusionally referred to as an empire. Sutton, 28 years old, a digital social media influencer whose entire online personality was built on a shaky foundation of heavily edited photos and borrowed luxury she could never actually afford. When my father delivered his crushing, humiliating blow, Fallon did not gasp in horror. She did not look at me with sympathy. She snickered. A tiny, cruel, unmistakable smirk played on her glossed lips as she took a slow, deliberate sip of her red wine, her eyes dancing with amusement. Sutton was somehow even worse. She casually tilted her latest model smartphone, adjusting her grip, making sure her camera lens was perfectly angled to catch my real-time reaction for whatever superficial group chat she was currently entertaining. They wanted to see me break. They were practically vibrating with anticipation, waiting for the ugly, embarrassing tears. They wanted the trembling chin, the stuttering voice, the pathetic, hasty retreat to the restroom. For so many years, I had been the silent family vault, the quiet, endless ATM machine that magically appeared to solve every major crisis. I funded every lavish vacation, I paid for every cosmetic procedure, and I bailed them out of every catastrophic financial mistake they carelessly made. I foolishly thought if I just provided enough stability, if I just fixed enough broken things behind the scenes, they would eventually look at me with the same blind, unconditional adoration they effortlessly handed to Fallon and Sutton. I thought, in my deep, pathetic insecurity, that I could simply buy my way into their hearts. But as I sat there in the chilling silence, listening to the echoing memory of my father calling me a barren failure, a profound, icy clarity washed over me. The pain did not break my spirit. It cured me. The desperate, pleading, unloved child residing inside my chest finally stopped crying, let out a final breath, and died quietly. In her place, a cold, ruthless, calculating woman woke up. The exact same woman who negotiated hostile corporate takeovers and evicted defaulting commercial tenants for a living. I did not flinch. I did not run away. I looked steadily at the heavy, intricate gold ring resting on my father's index finger. It was a lavish gift I had purchased for his 60th birthday because he wanted to impress his friends. Looking at that gold band, I realized something terrifyingly simple and hilariously tragic. He felt powerful only because he was standing on a mountain of my hard-earned money. He felt incredibly tall only because he was firmly standing on my exhausted shoulders. What happens when you step away from under a man who has entirely forgotten how to walk on his own 2 feet? In the agonizing, stretched-out seconds while the rest of the dinner table waited breathlessly for my emotional breakdown, my mind did not search for a witty, defensive comeback. It violently pulled me backward in time. When a thick, heavy steel cable finally snaps under extreme tension, you do not just feel the final, explosive break. You feel every single agonizing strain, every microscopic tear in the metal that led to that exact, catastrophic moment. My memory instantly turned into a sprawling, morbid museum of emotional pain, and the exhibits were crystal clear, illuminated by a harsh, unforgiving light. I was suddenly 18 years old again, standing awkwardly in the sterile, overly air-conditioned lobby of a local neighborhood bank, tightly clutching a worn-out, faded blue canvas backpack. I had just graduated high school with top honors and was desperately preparing to head to a good university. My grandparents, before they tragically passed away in a car accident when I was 12, had specifically set up a small educational trust fund solely in my name. $50,000. It was supposed to be my golden ticket to a decent education, my only real safety net in a house that prioritized my sisters over my existence. I had gone to the bank that bright Tuesday morning to officially inquire about transferring the funds to pay my upcoming first semester tuition and secure a modest dorm room. The bank teller, a sweet, elderly woman named Martha with thick reading glasses perched precariously on her nose, had looked at her computer screen, frowned deeply, and printed out a single sheet of paper. I vividly remember the cold, prickling sweat breaking out on the back of my neck as she silently slid the paper across the polished granite counter. The balance printed at the bottom was 0. My own father had forged my signature. He had manipulated the legal system, accessed the account as my primary guardian just mere weeks before my 18th birthday, and drained every single penny. When I confronted him in the dim light of our kitchen that night, my heart pounding so hard against my ribs I thought it would crack my chest open, he did not apologize. He did not look ashamed, guilty, or even remotely regretful. He sternly told me that being a family meant making hard sacrifices. He told me, with a straight face, that Fallon, who was only 15 years old at the time, needed a safe, reliable, and impressive vehicle for when she finally got her driver's license the following year. He had literally stolen my college fund, my dead grandparents' final, dying wish for my future, and used it to buy a brand new, fully loaded white BMW for his favorite, spoiled daughter. I can still remember the intoxicating, expensive smell of the pristine leather interior of that car when it arrived in our driveway. To me, it smelled exactly like my stolen future. I did not scream at him. I did not call the police, because I was an 18-year-old girl terrified of destroying the delicate fabric of my family. Instead, I swallowed the massive betrayal like a mouthful of crushed glass. I quietly abandoned my university dreams. I enrolled in the absolute cheapest, run-down community college I could find within a 50-mile radius. I worked 3 exhausting jobs just to survive. I scrubbed sticky tables at a local diner from dawn until noon, smelling constantly of stale grease. I sorted heavy textbooks in the dusty campus library in the afternoons. And I did mindless, straining data entry for a shipping logistics company late into the dark hours of the night. My hands were always rough and calloused, my eyes were perpetually bloodshot, and I survived on cheap ramen and black coffee. Meanwhile, Fallon drove her shiny new BMW to high school cheerleading practice, loudly complaining at the dinner table that the heated leather seats took far too long to warm up in the winter. But the devastating flashbacks did not stop there. The Museum of My Pain had a massive, undeniable center exhibit. I was 25 years old. I had finally managed to land my first major corporate job after years of relentless grinding, saving every single dime I earned, living in a tiny, drafty studio apartment situated directly above a noisy, 24-hour laundromat. That was the exact year Orson's plumbing supply business quietly, disastrously went under due to his chronic, hidden sports gambling addiction and gross, negligent mismanagement. He had shown up at my tiny apartment, crying actual, wet tears. It was the only time in my entire life I had ever seen that man cry. He confessed, trembling, that he was $680,000 in severe debt. The bank was aggressively initiating foreclosure on the beloved family estate in Oak Park. He told me my mother would be thrown out on the freezing street. He begged me, dropping to his hands and knees on my cheap linoleum floor. I panicked. I liquidated every single stock portfolio I had managed to painstakingly acquire. I took out a massive, terrifying personal loan with punishing, borderline predatory interest rates. But I was not a naive, helpless teenager anymore. I did not just blindly hand him a briefcase full of cash. I secretly hired a sharp real estate lawyer. I paid to set up an anonymous limited liability company, and I used that entity to legally buy the bad debt directly from the bank. I became the sole legal holder of the mortgage note. My father foolishly thought a shadowy, distant investment firm had miraculously bailed him out and granted him a rare, generous extension. He never once knew that the silent miracle saving his precious mansion was the very daughter he actively treated like a bothersome afterthought. I worked brutal, soul-crushing 80-hour weeks for years to pay off that mountain of debt, entirely sacrificing my roaring 20s, my dating life, and my mental peace, just to keep a solid roof over the head of a mother who would not even defend me at a public dinner party. And then, of course, there was Sutton. Just 2 years ago, when she arbitrarily decided she was far too good for a normal, working-class job and desperately wanted to be a famous travel influencer, she secretly maxed out a secondary emergency credit card I had given her for groceries and gas. $25,000 recklessly spent on luxury hotel suites in Paris, designer bags in Milan, and first-class flights. When I furiously confronted her with the bill, she simply rolled her eyes, flipped her hair, and told her thousands of fake followers she had secured a private, wealthy sponsor. I was the sponsor. Every single memory crashed heavily into me, thick, heavy, and suffocating. They genuinely thought I was a mindless, unfeeling money tree. They mistook my long silence for permanent weakness. They entirely forgot that when you force a single tree to bear the immense weight of an entire grand mansion, its roots are forced to dig incredibly deep into the very foundation. And if that tired tree finally decides to violently uproot itself, it brings the whole massive house down with it. The true, undeniable catalyst for tonight's impending slaughter had not actually happened at this fancy dinner table. It had happened exactly 48 hours ago, high up in my sleek, temperature-controlled, glass-walled corner office overlooking the murky green water of the Chicago River. I was buried deep in the middle of reviewing a massive, highly complex acquisition contract for a new downtown high-rise when my private desk phone rang. The caller ID showed it was Gwendolyn, the strict, no-nonsense property manager for a high-end commercial retail building located in the trendy West Loop neighborhood. She sounded unusually frantic, maintaining her professional tone, but clearly operating at the very end of her rope. "Maren, I am so incredibly sorry to bother you directly with this," Gwendolyn had said, her voice tight with thinly veiled frustration. "But I have a critical, escalating situation with the tenant in Retail Unit 4. Fallon Gallagher. My sister's so-called boutique. What exactly is the issue, Gwendolyn? I asked, putting down my gold pen and rubbing my throbbing temples, already feeling a familiar, heavy migraine blooming behind my eyes. She is 4 full months behind on her commercial rent. The arrears currently total $28,000. We have sent multiple formal, certified notices, but today, when our head security guard tried to politely deliver the final eviction warning to her in person, she threw a piping hot latte directly at his chest and aggressively threatened to sue our management company for targeted harassment. I closed my eyes, letting out a long, slow breath. $28,000. Another massive fire I was expected to quietly extinguish. I will handle it personally, Gwendolyn. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. Please hold off on calling the police regarding the assault. I immediately picked up my cell phone and called Fallon. She answered on the 4th ring, loud, obnoxious club music pumping heavily in the background. What do you want? She snapped into the receiver, not even bothering to offer a basic hello. You owe $28,000 in back rent, Fallon. You physically assaulted a building security guard today with a hot beverage. What exactly is your exit plan here? I kept my voice perfectly level, devoid of any emotion. She scoffed, a wet, incredibly dismissive sound that grated on my nerves. Oh my God, literally relax, Barren. It is just a temporary cash flow issue. The new spring inventory is coming in next week and it will sell out. Look, you make millions of dollars doing whatever boring math you do. You literally have no husband, no kids, no actual life. What is your pile of money even for? Just pay the stupid invoice for me and tell the landlord to back off. Do not be such a greedy, selfish sister. The sheer, breathtaking entitlement hung thickly in the air between the cell towers. She didn't ask for a favor. She didn't beg. She demanded it as if it were her birthright to access my bank accounts. Before I could form a sharp enough response, the line shuffled aggressively. My father's booming voice suddenly came through the speaker. He must have been standing right next to her at the boutique. Barren, listen to me right now, Orson barked, forcefully taking over the conversation. The bank is stubbornly refusing to give Fallon a business extension loan. They are being ridiculous. I need you to sign a commercial guarantor form today. Just a small, temporary line of credit to keep the boutique doors open until the holidays. No. The single word slipped out of my mouth easily. Smoothly. Without a single ounce of hesitation. Excuse me. My father's voice instantly dropped an octave, entering that dark, dangerous territory he usually reserved for intimidating contractors. I am not signing any legal documents. I am not paying her back rent. She needs to face the real-world consequences of running a failing business. You ungrateful, arrogant little brat, Orson snarled, his voice vibrating with sudden rage. You have what you have right now because of my superior genetics. Because of the relentless work ethic I personally instilled in you. I have the guarantor paperwork sitting right here on the counter. I can just sign it for you, Barren. I know your signature. Do not test me. If you let your sister fail, I will expose you to the whole family. I will tell everyone we know how you maliciously abandoned your own flesh and blood when we desperately needed a tiny, insignificant favor. He was actively threatening to forge my signature to commit bank fraud. Again. Just like he did when I was a helpless 18-year-old girl. That was the exact, defining moment the thick, invisible cord tying me to my toxic family finally snapped. It did not make a loud, dramatic noise. It just quietly dissolved into ash. I looked at the expensive framed family photo sitting on the corner of my mahogany desk. The one where Orson and Delphine were smiling proudly, their arms wrapped tightly around Fallon, while I stood slightly out of focus, relegated to the background like a hired servant. I reached out, pushed the heavy silver frame over, and laid it face down on the polished wood. Do whatever you think you need to do, Orson, I said softly, my voice chillingly calm. And I hung up the phone. That specific phone call was the final, rusty nail in the coffin. It was the undeniable moment I realized they did not view me as a human being with feelings, dreams, or boundaries. I was a mere utility. A disposable resource to be endlessly mined, shamelessly exploited, and carelessly discarded the second the well ran dry. And now, Sitting at this lavish anniversary dinner, listening to him publicly call me a barren failure while my mother twisted her napkin and my sisters laughed at my supposed misery, the profound transformation was fully complete. The lingering guilt was entirely gone. The foolish hope was dead and buried. I picked up the small, polished silver dessert spoon resting next to my plate and tapped it firmly against the rim of my crystal water glass. 3 sharp, clear, ringing chimes that effortlessly cut through the heavy, oppressive silence of the private dining room. It was time to permanently close the tab. The sharp, sudden ringing of the crystal glass made Orson pause mid-breath. His cruel, triumphant smirk faltered just a microscopic fraction, clearly unsure of what I was about to do. The 25 wealthy, well-dressed guests held their collective breath, their eyes darting nervously between my father and me. They expected a scene. They expected tears. They fully expected me to grab my expensive purse, push my chair back, and run out of the restaurant in a dramatic cloud of utter humiliation, leaving my father looking like the stern but righteous patriarch. Instead, I smiled. It was not a warm, forgiving smile. It was the exact kind of cold, calculated smile an apex predator gives right before it sinks its teeth deep into the neck of its prey. I kept my hands resting lightly and elegantly on the white tablecloth, my posture impeccably straight, my shoulders relaxed. I looked my father dead in the eyes, refusing to blink, refusing to let him look away and escape the moment. "That is a truly fascinating question, Orson," I said. My voice was not loud, I didn't need to shout, but it was incredibly sharp. It carried flawlessly to every single shadowed corner of the grand room. "But since we are so openly sharing our deepest, most honest feelings tonight, I have a very important question for you." I leaned forward just a single inch, closing the distance. "How does it feel knowing this barren failure is shredding your entire financial safety net starting tomorrow morning?" Orson blinked rapidly. The deep red flush of alcohol on his cheeks seemed to freeze in place. "What the hell are you talking about?" he demanded, trying desperately to maintain his authoritative, booming tone, but a tiny, pathetic crack of real uncertainty bled through his words. I did not break eye contact for a millisecond. I reached slowly into my designer purse and pulled out the heavy, solid metal black credit card. The elite secondary card I had authorized for him 5 years ago, paid entirely out of my own pocket, to cover his ridiculous golf club memberships, his expensive imported cigars, and his custom-tailored Italian suits. I held it up between my index and middle finger so the warm restaurant lighting caught the raised silver numbers. Then, without looking away from him, I reached smoothly into the breast pocket of the terrified waiter who was standing frozen in shock nearby, plucking the heavy silver cigar cutter directly from his apron. With a swift, practiced, flawless motion, I slid the prestigious black card into the sharp mouth of the cutter and pressed down hard. A loud, sharp crack echoed violently in the silent room as the thick metal card snapped cleanly in half. I opened my hand and let the 2 useless pieces fall. They clattered loudly against the fine china of my father's untouched soup bowl. Fallon let out a loud, dramatic gasp, covering her mouth with her hands. Sutton dropped her smartphone onto the table with a loud thud, completely forgetting to record. "You ungrateful, crazy bitch," Fallon hissed, finally finding her shrill voice, her face contorted in anger. "Are you insane? You are ruining Mom and Dad's special anniversary dinner." "Oh, sweetie, I am not ruining anything," I replied smoothly, standing up slowly, taking my time to smooth the imaginary wrinkles from my tailored skirt. "I am just officially resigning from my unpaid position as the Gallagher family bank. Effective immediately. Your overdue rent at the boutique? Not my problem anymore. Your staggering credit card bills, Sutton? Pay them yourself with your fake sponsor money. And Orson." I looked back at the pathetic man who had actively terrorized my self-esteem for 30 long years. "Have fun figuring out how to pay the $4,000 bill for this lovely dinner tonight. Because my money is no longer good here." I calmly opened my leather wallet, pulled out 3 crisp, new $50 bills, and laid them neatly on the table next to my plate. $150. For my duck confit and my single glass of wine. The rest is entirely on you." Orson's face transitioned from red to a highly dangerous shade of purple. He slammed both of his heavy fists onto the table, aggressively rattling the expensive silverware and knocking over a water glass. "You will not walk out of here, Barren. You call your bank right this second. You do not disrespect me in front of our friends." "I just did," I said softly. I turned my back on him. The ultimate, unforgivable insult to a raging narcissist. I walked deliberately toward the grand exit of the private dining room. The wealthy guests parted for me like the Red Sea, pulling their chairs in, their faces a complex mixture of profound shock, deep horror, and morbid, undeniable fascination. As I reached the heavy mahogany doors, a soft, trembling hand gently caught my elbow. I tensed instantly, ready to snap and defend myself, but when I looked down, I saw my Aunt Althea, my mother's older sister. The only person in this entire toxic bloodline who had ever looked at me with genuine, uncomplicated kindness. She lived a very modest life as a retired school teacher, and she knew exactly what kind of monster Orson truly was behind closed doors. She leaned in close, her soft eyes shining with unshed, proud tears, and squeezed my arm tightly. "Well done, my brave girl," she whispered, her voice so soft only I could hear it over the ringing in my ears. "Do not look back. Keep walking." I gave her a tiny, grateful nod, pushed the heavy wooden doors open, and stepped out into the cool, dark, liberating night air. But Aunt Althea did not know the full truth of the situation. She honestly thought I was just angrily cutting off their monthly allowances. She did not know that the storm hitting the Gallagher family tonight was not just a canceled dinner bill. It was a financial Category 5 hurricane, and it was about to make a devastating landfall. The drive from the upscale suburb of Oak Park back to my sleek apartment in downtown Chicago took exactly 40 uninterrupted minutes. It was, without a doubt, the most profoundly peaceful 40 minutes of my entire adult life. I rolled the tinted windows down, letting the crisp, biting autumn air whip wildly through my hair, clearing away the lingering stench of expensive cologne and fake pleasantries. I did not turn on the radio. I just listened intently to the steady, powerful hum of the engine and the rhythmic, calming thumping of my own heartbeat. It was no longer racing with crippling anxiety. It was beating with a slow, heavy, unstoppable purpose. When I finally stepped into my luxurious penthouse apartment, the sprawling, glittering city lights of Chicago spread out before me through the floor-to-ceiling windows like a massive, electric carpet. I kicked off my painful designer heels, walked to the kitchen island, poured myself a very generous glass of a robust Cabernet Sauvignon, and finally looked down at my cell phone screen. The screen was an absolute battlefield of notifications. 47 missed calls. Over 100 frantic, messy text messages. Most of them were from Orson, leaving rambling voicemails filled with unhinged rage, swearing loudly that he would personally destroy my corporate career, that he would legally disown me, that I was dead and buried to him. There were frantic, typo-ridden texts from Fallon aggressively calling me a heartless monster and a jealous spinster. There was a pathetic, quietly weeping voicemail from my mother, Delphine, begging me to just turn the car around, come back, and pay the restaurant bill so they could leave the establishment with a tiny shred of their dignity intact. I took a slow, deep sip of the rich red wine, letting the complex flavors coat my tongue, and smiled to myself in the empty room. Their dignity was already completely gone. I had meticulously made sure of it hours ago. While I was thoroughly enjoying my wine, looking out at the beautiful city skyline, a very different, highly chaotic scene was unfolding back in Oak Park. I did not have to physically be there to see it. I had orchestrated the entire sequence of events perfectly. I knew exactly how Orson operated. I knew he would eventually bully one of his wealthy, uncomfortable golf buddies into covering the massive dinner check, aggressively promising to pay them back first thing on Monday morning with interest. I knew he would eventually march his family out the front glass doors of Latoile, puffing his chest out like a proud peacock, trying desperately to pretend the humiliating scene inside had not permanently shattered his fragile ego. But what he did not know was that I had made a very specific, binding phone call to a ruthless commercial repossession company earlier that afternoon. As Orson, Delphine, Fallon, and Sutton stepped out from under the restaurant's elegant awning, the weather had turned. The rain had started to fall heavily. a cold, miserable, biting Chicago downpour. They walked briskly toward the valet stand, handing over their little paper tickets, expecting to sink into heated leather seats. Orson drove a sleek, silver Mercedes-Benz sedan. Fallon had a custom, stark white Lexus SUV to haul her boutique inventory. Sutton drove a flashy, convertible BMW to look good for her videos. They loved those expensive cars. They paraded them around town like hard-earned trophies of their immense success. But the confused valet did not bring the shiny cars around. Instead, 3 massive, heavy-duty commercial tow trucks with blindingly bright, flashing yellow lights aggressively blocked the main entrance of the restaurant, their diesel engines rumbling loudly. I had paid for all 3 of those luxury vehicles in full. My legal name was firmly printed on all 3 titles. I was the sole legal owner, and they were merely authorized, temporary drivers. Yesterday afternoon, I had officially, legally revoked that authorization with the state. I could picture the pathetic scene with vivid, glorious clarity. Orson standing in the pouring rain, his expensive suit getting ruined, screaming at the towering tow truck drivers, wildly waving his arms, demanding they immediately unhook his precious Mercedes. The drivers, burly, unbothered men who dealt with angry, defaulting debtors for a living, simply handing him the damp, legal repossession paperwork with my distinct signature printed clearly on the bottom line. Fallon throwing a massive, childish tantrum in her ruined designer heels, crying loudly as the rain destroyed her expensive salon blowout. Sutton frantically trying to film the entire humiliating incident to garner sympathy from her followers, only to tragically realize her unlimited phone data plan, which I also paid for every month, had been permanently disconnected an hour ago. They were completely stranded. 3 grown adults draped in thousands of dollars worth of useless designer clothes, standing on a wet, freezing concrete sidewalk in the suburbs, realizing for the very first time in their privileged lives that the ground beneath their feet did not actually belong to them. They could not use their platinum credit cards to call a luxury Uber because the accounts were frozen solid. They could not call me to scream at me because I had turned on the strict block feature on my phone. They had to walk 3 miserable, soaking wet blocks in the freezing rain to find a late night, run-down taxi stand, shivering uncontrollably, utterly humiliated, and finally stripped of the expensive financial armor I had bought for them to wear. I finished my glass of wine, set the empty crystal glass gently on the granite counter, walked to my bedroom, and slipped under the heavy, warm duvet. For the first time in 10 agonizing years, I did not grind my teeth in my sleep. I slept deeply, like a baby without a care in the world. I knew tomorrow morning was going to be an all-out war, and I wanted to be fully, perfectly rested when the enemy finally came knocking at my door. The aggressive pounding on my front door started at exactly 8 o'clock in the morning. It was not a polite, hesitant knock. It was a violent, rhythmic, desperate hammering that aggressively vibrated through the heavy, solid oak wood of my apartment door. I was already wide awake. I had showered, dressed meticulously in a sharp, tailored, intimidating black corporate suit, and brewed a fresh pot of incredibly strong black coffee. I felt exactly like a seasoned general waiting calmly in the war room for the enemy to arrive. I walked slowly and deliberately to the door, checking the high-definition security monitor mounted on the wall. There they were. Orson, Fallon, and Sutton. They looked like absolute, unmitigated hell. The freezing rain and the humiliation from the night before had left a deep, visible mark on all of them. Orson's expensive, tailored suit was deeply wrinkled and smelled faintly of damp wool, his face a terrifying, unhealthy shade of crimson red. Fallon had massive, dark purple circles under her bloodshot eyes, her usually perfect, bouncy hair tied tightly in a messy, wet knot at the top of her head. Sutton just looked deeply terrified, clutching her dead smartphone like a useless security blanket. My mother, Delphine, was noticeably absent from the group. She had probably stayed home, hiding quietly in her bedroom with the door locked to avoid dealing with the chaotic fallout, just as she always did. I calmly unfastened the heavy deadbolt and pulled the door wide open. Before I could even offer a sarcastic greeting, Orson violently pushed past me, practically vibrating with uncontrolled rage. He marched heavily into the absolute center of my pristine living room, pointing a thick, shaking, accusatory finger directly at my face. "You have gone way too far this time, Barren," he bellowed at the top of his lungs, his rough voice echoing harshly off the high ceilings of my apartment. "You deeply embarrass me in front of my peers. You stranded us in the freezing rain like animals. You literally stole our cars." I legally recovered my own corporate assets, I corrected him calmly, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my hot coffee, letting the steam warm my face. "You were actively driving stolen property the exact second I officially revoked your access privileges." Fallon stepped out from behind his broad back, her voice shrill, raspy, and deeply hysterical. "You are deeply sick. You are a literal psycho, Barren. Do you have any idea how much a disgusting taxi cost last night? I had to humiliate myself and borrow cash from Aunt Althea just to get back to the house. Turn the credit cards back on right now. Stop throwing this pathetic temper tantrum." They still didn't get it. They were so deeply entrenched in their own delusion, they still genuinely thought this was just a temporary, emotional temper tantrum. They stubbornly thought I was just a wounded, pathetic puppy acting out for a day, desperately begging for their scraps of attention, and that if they just stood in my living room and yelled loud enough, I would eventually cower in fear, apologize, and open my wallet again to make the scary noises stop. Or what exactly? I asked softly, casually leaning my weight against the cool marble of the kitchen island. Orson sneered viciously, aggressively crossing his thick arms over his broad chest. "Or you are permanently out of this family. I will legally disown you. You will not be welcome at the house ever again. You will not spend any holidays with us. I will personally make sure every single person we know understands exactly what a selfish, barren, worthless disappointment you truly are. You will have absolutely no one left in this world." He eagerly played his final trump card. The ultimate threat of total isolation. The very threat that used to keep me awake at night for years, terrified of being completely alone and unloved in the world. I looked at him. Really, truly looked at him for the first time without the lens of a desperate daughter. He was not a powerful patriarch. He was just an old, tired, financially ruined man rapidly running out of breath and options. I set my ceramic coffee mug down on the counter with a soft clink. I walked slowly over to the modern glass coffee table situated in the center of the room. Resting squarely on top of it was a thick, heavy, bulging manila folder. I picked it up and held it out toward his chest. "You genuinely think I am afraid of being disowned from a family that only remembers they love me on the first of the month when the utility bills are due?" I asked, my voice dropping to a deadly, chillingly calm whisper. "Before you pack my imaginary bags and kick me out, Orson, I highly suggest you take a very close look at what is inside this folder." Orson snatched the thick folder aggressively out of my hand, glaring at me with deep suspicion. He roughly flipped it open. Fallon and Sutton eagerly crowded around his shoulders, craning their necks to look at the papers. Inside was a large stack of complex legal documents, printed on thick, expensive watermarked paper. Heavy red notary stamps. Intricate legal jargon. Signatures. "What is this legal nonsense?" Orson muttered under his breath, his eyes rapidly scanning the dense text of the first page. "Read the second line, cha," I said, intentionally using the Vietnamese word for father, a sharp, sarcastic nod to the heritage he only ever loved to boast about when it suited his narrative of being a hardworking immigrant success story. His eyes slowly tracked down the page. I watched with immense satisfaction the exact moment his brain finally processed the words printed in bold black ink. The angry crimson flush violently drained from his face so fast he looked like a fresh corpse. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The heavy folder began to shake uncontrollably in his hands. "What does it say, Dad?" Sutton asked, her voice trembling slightly, clearly sensing the catastrophic, irreversible shift in the room's energy. Orson slowly looked up at me, his eyes wide with a pure, unadulterated terror I had never seen him display before. This is legally impossible. The bank, the massive investment firm. The massive investment firm that mercifully bought the bad mortgage note to your estate 9 years ago when you were secretly facing total bankruptcy. I finished the sentence for him, my voice devoid of any pity. Iron Oak LLC. I reached calmly into my blazer pocket, pulled out a sleek, minimalist matte black business card, and casually tossed it onto the glass table, where it landed with a soft, final thud. I am the CEO and the sole, 100% owner of Iron Oak LLC, Orson. I did not just generously pay your monthly bills out of the kindness of my heart. I bought your crippling debt. I hold the actual deed to the property. You do not own a sprawling mansion in Oak Park. You are just my tenant. And as of 8 o'clock this morning, your lease is officially terminated. Thank you for watching until this tense moment. If you enjoyed Maren's comeback, please comment, "I'm Win" below. This is a secret code for the amazing viewers who have watched this far, and I will like and reply to any comment containing the keyword "I'm Win." Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the disastrous end for the gold diggers in the next part. The heavy silence in my living room was thick enough to choke on. I watched my father's eyes dart wildly across the crisp, watermarked pages of the legal documents, his mind desperately trying to reject the reality printed in stark black ink. He read the words again and again. The aggressive, domineering patriarch who had commanded every room he ever walked into was suddenly reduced to a trembling, pale shadow of a man. Iron Oak LLC. The phantom corporate entity he had praised for years. The faceless investment firm he bragged about at his country club, telling his wealthy friends that a brilliant team of Wall Street analysts had seen the immense potential in his real estate portfolio and decided to graciously extend his mortgage terms. He slowly lowered the folder, his hands shaking so violently the papers rustled like dry leaves in the wind. He started, his voice barely a raspy whisper, stripped of all its usual booming authority. You are Iron Oak. I am, I replied, my voice steady, cool, and entirely unbothered. 9 years ago, when your plumbing supply business collapsed because you were throwing tens of thousands of dollars away on offshore sports betting, the bank was days away from locking the doors of the Oak Park estate. You came to my tiny apartment crying. You begged me to save you. I took a slow step toward him, the heels of my shoes clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. I did not just call the bank and ask for a favor, Orson. I liquidated my entire stock portfolio. I emptied every single savings account I had bled for. I took on a massive personal loan with predatory interest rates that kept me awake and crying in the middle of the night. I used all of it to legally purchase your toxic debt. I bought the mortgage note. I own the deed to the property. For almost a decade, you have been living in my house, sleeping under my roof, and treating me like garbage while I silently paid the property taxes you claimed you were handling. Sutton let out a small, terrified whimper, shrinking back toward the door. Fallon, however, was too arrogant to understand the gravity of the situation. This is illegal. Fallon shrieked, her voice echoing painfully in the room. You cannot just steal our family home. Dad, tell her she cannot do this. Call a lawyer. We will sue you for everything you have, Maren. I turned my gaze to my sister. Her face was red, her mascara smeared beneath her eyes from the rain, looking like a deranged, spoiled child throwing a tantrum in a toy store. Sue me with what money, Fallon? I asked softly. Orson collapsed onto my expensive leather sofa as if his legs had suddenly turned to dust. He buried his face in his hands, letting out a ragged, pathetic sound that was somewhere between a sob and a gasp. The terrifying realization was finally setting in. He had spent 10 years mocking the exact woman who held the literal keys to his entire existence. You're going to kick your own mother out onto the street? Orson mumbled through his fingers, trying desperately to weaponize Delphine against me, his favorite tactic. Mom gets a choice, I stated firmly. She has always had a choice. I have already secured a beautiful, quiet 2-bedroom apartment on the north side of the city. One room is mine. The other is hers, free of charge, with no strings attached. But you, Orson? You have exactly 30 days to pack your golf clubs, your cheap cigars, and your massive ego and vacate my property. The room spun into a chaotic silence. The sheer magnitude of the power shift was staggering. The man who had humiliated me in front of 25 people just 12 hours ago was now sitting on my couch, entirely broken, staring at the floor as if a trapdoor had just opened beneath his feet. But I was not done. The hurricane had only just made landfall. Fallon marched forward, pointing her finger dangerously close to my face. "You think you are so smart? You think you hold all the cards?" She sneered, her chest heaving with misplaced confidence. "Fine. Keep the stupid house. Mom and Dad can come live with me. My boutique is expanding. We are doing incredibly well. I do not need your toxic money, Barren. I am a self-made CEO. I could not help it." I genuinely laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound that made Fallon flinch. "You are a CEO?" I asked, walking back to my kitchen island. I opened the top drawer and pulled out a second, much thinner manila envelope. I tossed it onto the glass table, right next to Orson's eviction notice. "Open it, self-made CEO," I challenged her. Fallon glared at me, snatching the envelope. She ripped the top open and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a commercial property lease agreement. Her eyes scanned the document, her arrogant expression faltering. "You rent your retail space in the West Loop building, correct?" I asked, leaning against the counter. "A prime location. High foot traffic. Very expensive. You are currently 4 months behind on your rent. $28,000 in arrears." "How do you know that?" Fallon whispered, her face draining of color. "Because 2 years ago, my firm acquired that entire building," I explained patiently, as if speaking to a slow toddler. "I personally reviewed the tenant roster. I saw your failing boutique bleeding money. I was the silent landlord who explicitly instructed the property manager, Gwendolyn, to grant you endless extensions. I protected you. But yesterday, when you threw a hot latte at my security guard and told me I was a useless spinster who should pay your bills, I changed my mind." I tapped the paper in her trembling hands. "That is a formal notice of lockout. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, the locks on your boutique will be changed. Your inventory will be seized to cover the $28,000 you owe me. You are not a CEO, Fallon. You are a delinquent tenant, and you are officially out of business." Fallon dropped the paper as if it were on fire. She stumbled backward, her hands flying to her mouth, tears of pure panic finally spilling over her eyelashes. No, you cannot do that. My inventory, my brand." Sutton, watching her older sister crumble, suddenly puffed out her chest, trying to salvage some shred of the golden child pride. "Well, you cannot touch me," Sutton declared, crossing her arms defensively. "I am an independent influencer. I have brand deals. I have sponsors paying for my travels. I do not need your credit cards anyway, Barren. My followers love me." I turned my attention to the youngest Gallagher. "Sponsors," I repeated slowly, letting the word roll around in the quiet room. "You mean the luxury travel agency that paid for your trip to Milan? Or the boutique marketing firm that funds your expensive dinners in Miami?" Sutton frowned, looking slightly confused. "Yes, my talent management secured them." I opened my laptop on the kitchen counter, turned the screen so she could see it, and pressed a single button. 3 different bank statements appeared side by side. "Those agencies are shell companies, Sutton," I revealed, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I created them. I funded them. Every single dollar you have made from brand deals in the last 2 years came directly from my personal bank account. I paid you to travel because it was cheaper and less exhausting than having you live at home and constantly beg me for shopping money." Sutton stared at the screen, her eyes wide, her mouth hanging open in utter disbelief. "I sent the emails this morning," I continued. "Your contracts are terminated. Your fake sponsors are gone. You have 0 income, Sutton. And since I canceled the secondary credit card you maxed out last month, you now personally owe $40,000 to American Express. I suggest you start looking for a real job." The twin pillars of my father's pride collapsed simultaneously. Fallon fell to her knees, sobbing loudly into her hands, mourning the loss of her fake empire. Sutton leaned against the wall, sliding down until she hit the floor, staring blankly at her dead phone, realizing her entire life was a carefully constructed illusion funded by the sister she despised. They were utterly destroyed. But the doorbell was about to ring, and the final nail was about to be hammered into the coffin. Right on cue, the sharp, authoritative buzz of my apartment intercom cut through the sounds of my sister's weeping. I pressed the button, spoke 2 words, and waited. Less than a minute later, a heavy knock sounded at the door. I opened it to reveal 2 men. The first was a uniformed Chicago police officer. The second was Merrick, my ruthless, incredibly sharp real estate attorney, carrying a sleek leather briefcase. Orson looked up from the couch, his eyes darting between the police officer and the lawyer. His survival instincts, honed by years of dodging angry creditors, suddenly kicked in. He scrambled to his feet, trying to muster some semblance of his old authority. "Officer, thank God you are here," Orson stammered, pointing a shaking finger at me. "My daughter has lost her mind. She is trying to illegally evict me. She is stealing my business. Arrest her." The officer did not even blink. He crossed his arms and looked at Orson with a mixture of boredom and pity. "Sir, I am here strictly to keep the peace during the serving of legal documents." Merrick stepped forward, his expensive suit immaculate, his expression cold as ice. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of papers bound by a blue legal ribbon. "Orson Gallagher," Merrick said, his voice crisp and professional. "You are hereby served with a formal 30-day notice of eviction from the property located in Oak Park. Furthermore, you are served with a cease and desist order preventing you from removing any fixtures, appliances, or valuable assets from the premises as they legally belong to Iron Oak LLC. Orson's eyes widened wildly. He looked at Merrick, then at me, and then he did something so profoundly pathetic it made my stomach turn. He lunged forward, grabbing Merrick by the sleeve of his suit, pulling the lawyer slightly away from the police officer. "Listen to me," Orson whispered frantically, his voice dripping with desperation. "I know how you guys work. She is paying you, right? I will give you $10,000 cash today. Just lose the paperwork. Find a loophole. Delay this in court for a year. $10,000, just for you." Merrick slowly looked down at the hand grabbing his sleeve. He gently but firmly pried Orson's fingers off his suit. A dark, terrifying shadow crossed the lawyer's face. "Orson," Merrick said softly, leaning in so only my father and I could hear. "Do you happen to remember a man named Arthur Stevens?" Orson frowned, confused by the sudden change in topic. "What?" "Arthur Stevens," Merrick repeated, his voice dangerously low. "He owned a small masonry business 20 years ago. He did the stone work for your first warehouse. You refused to pay him his $100,000 invoice. You dragged him through court until he went bankrupt. He lost his house." Orson swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. That was just business. He shot himself in his truck on a Tuesday afternoon," Merrick whispered, his eyes blazing with a suppressed, decades-old fury. "He was my father. I changed my last name when I passed the bar exam." Orson literally stopped breathing. He stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the glass coffee table. "I took Marin's case for a grand total of $1, Orson," Merrick stated, stepping back and straightening his tie. "I would have done it for free just to watch you lose everything. Have a terrible day." While Orson was suffocating on the ghosts of his past, my phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. I picked it up. A notification from Facebook. My uncle Declan, Orson's younger brother and the biggest gossip in the family, had just posted a massive, rambling status update. The post read, "Absolutely heartbroken today. My niece Marin has lost her mind and is abusing her own parents, disrespecting her father at his anniversary dinner and threatening to kick them out. Money changes people. Praying for my brother Orson in this dark time." I smiled. The flying monkeys were attempting to mobilize. I did not write a long, emotional paragraph defending myself. I simply went into my digital files, retrieved a scanned document, and posted it as a photo comment directly under Declan's status. It was a promissory note. 5 years ago, Declan had borrowed $15,000 from Orson to avoid jail time for unpaid child support. When I bought Orson's debts, that promissory note had been legally transferred to my LLC. My comment simply read, "Hi Uncle Declan. Since you are so concerned about family finances, this is a friendly reminder that your $15,000 debt is now legally owed to me. Payment is due in full by Friday, or I will file the garnishment paperwork with your employer." I refreshed the page exactly 60 seconds later. The entire post had been deleted. The flying monkeys had officially retreated into the shadows. The sheer weight of the morning, the loss of the house, the destruction of the boutique, the unmasking of the fake sponsorships, and the terrifying ghost of Arthur Stevens finally broke Orson's mind. But Orson was a manipulator to his core. When backed into a corner with no escape, he played his ultimate victim card. Right there in my living room, under the watchful eye of the police officer and Merrick, Orson suddenly gasped loudly. He clutched his chest with both hands, his face contorting into a mask of pure agony. He let out a dramatic groan, his knees buckling, and he collapsed onto the hardwood floor, writhing and gasping for air like a fish out of water. "Dad!" Fallon screamed, rushing to his side, completely forgetting her own ruined life for a second. "Call an ambulance. He is having a heart attack. You are killing him, Marin." The police officer immediately radioed for paramedics. I stood perfectly still, watching the performance. I had seen him do this exact routine 10 years ago when the IRS audited him. The ambulance arrived, loaded him onto a stretcher, and rushed him to the nearest emergency room. Fallon and Sutton rode in the back, glaring at me with pure hatred as the doors closed. I did not ride with them. I simply told Merrick to handle the lockouts, grabbed my coat, and drove myself to the hospital. When I arrived at the cardiac ward 2 hours later, I did not go into his room. I made a phone call to a private, highly respected cardiologist who owed me a favor from a real estate deal. I paid him out of pocket to go in, review Orson's charts, and perform a private examination. I sat in the sterile, overly bright waiting room, watching Fallon and Sutton pace back and forth, crying loudly, playing the role of the devoted, grief-stricken daughters. 10 minutes later, my private doctor walked out into the waiting room. He looked annoyed. "Well?" Fallon demanded, rushing up to him. "Is he going to need surgery?" The doctor sighed, taking off his glasses. "Your father is perfectly fine. His EKG is normal. His blood pressure is slightly elevated due to stress, but there is zero sign of a myocardial infarction. In fact, when I walked into the room, he was secretly eating a double cheeseburger someone had smuggled in for him. He is faking it." Fallon and Sutton froze. The tears stopped instantly. "He is faking?" Sutton asked, her voice dropping the dramatic tremble. "Yes," the doctor said dryly. "The hospital is discharging him in an hour. He will need to pay the emergency room bill out of pocket since he refused to provide insurance information." The doctor walked away. I stood up and walked slowly toward my sisters. The terrifying reality of their situation was finally crystallizing in their minds. Orson was not dying. He was just broke. And worse, he was a massive liability. "He has nothing, Marin," Fallon whispered, looking at the closed door of his hospital room, a look of profound disgust washing over her face. "He lost the house. He has no money. And neither do you," I reminded her coldly. I watched as the legendary bond of the Golden Children shattered. The unconditional love they supposedly had for their father evaporated the exact second the money ran out. Fallon grabbed her purse, her face hardening into a mask of pure selfishness. "I am not paying his hospital bill. My life is ruined. I need to go salvage whatever inventory I can before you lock my doors." She turned on her heel and stormed out of the hospital without looking back. Sutton hesitated for only a second. "I cannot be seen in a hospital waiting room," she muttered, pulling her coat tight. "It ruins my aesthetic." She followed her sister out the sliding glass doors. They did not even walk into the room to say goodbye. When Orson finally emerged in his wrinkled suit, expecting his devoted family to be weeping by his bedside, he found only me, sitting quietly in a plastic chair, holding the discharging paperwork. "They left you, Orson," I said simply, handing him the massive hospital bill. For the first time in his life, Orson looked truly, deeply old. The brawny patriarch was gone, replaced by a frail, abandoned man holding a piece of paper he could never afford to pay. I left Orson sitting in the hospital lobby. I did not offer him a ride. I drove back to my apartment, emotionally drained but resolute. The war was almost won, but there was one final, painful battle left to fight. My phone rang. It was Delphine. My mother. "Barren, please," she sobbed into the receiver. "I am sitting in the dark. Orson just called me from a payphone. He said you took everything. He said you are kicking us out. Please, Barren. He is your father. This is still our family. You cannot just destroy us." I closed my eyes, fighting back the sting of tears. She was still defending him. Even after everything, she was still begging me to lay down and let him walk all over me. "Meet me at the coffee shop down the street from the house," I told her. "Just you." When I walked into the quiet cafe, Delphine was sitting in a corner booth, looking fragile and terrified. I slid into the seat across from her and placed a thick, sealed envelope on the table. "Mom," I said softly, "I am not destroying this family. Orson destroyed it decades ago. I am just finally turning on the lights so we can see the wreckage." She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He loves us, Barren. He just makes mistakes. You have to forgive him." I reached forward and pushed the envelope toward her. "Open it." She hesitated, her hands trembling, and tore the seal. She pulled out a stack of papers. It was a comprehensive federal credit report. "Look at the name at the top, Mom," I instructed gently. She squinted. "Delphine Gallagher. It is my credit report." "Why?" "I do not have any credit cards. Orson handles all the finances." "Look at page 3, I pushed. She turned the page. Her eyes widened. Listed on the report were 5 different platinum credit cards. All maxed out. All deeply in default. The total debt amounted to nearly $90,000. "What is this?" She whispered in horror. "I never opened these." "I know you didn't," I replied. "Orson did. He used your social security number behind your back years ago. When his own credit was ruined by his gambling, he stole your identity to keep funding his lifestyle. Your credit score is completely dead, Mom. If you tried to rent an apartment or buy a car today, you would be rejected everywhere. He didn't protect you. He sacrificed you to save himself." I watched the exact moment my mother's heart broke. It was a silent, devastating implosion. For 35 years, she had endured his yelling, his drinking, his blatant favoritism, all under the delusion that he was the great provider keeping her safe from the scary world. Finding out he had secretly financially ruined her was the final, unforgivable betrayal. The tears stopped. A cold, hard light entered Delphine's eyes. A light I had never seen before. She carefully folded the credit report and put it in her purse. Then, she reached into her oversized tote bag and pulled out something wrapped in a plastic grocery bag. She slid it across the table to me. "What is this?" I asked. I opened the plastic. Inside was a thick, black leather-bound ledger. It looked old, the pages yellowed and worn. "For 20 years, Delphine said, her voice eerily calm and steady, Orson made me keep the secondary books for his plumbing business. The real books. The cash jobs he hid from the IRS. The money he laundered through the country club. I kept every receipt. I documented every hidden transaction because I was terrified of going to jail if he ever got caught. He thinks I burned it a decade ago." She looked me dead in the eye. Her posture was straight. She no longer looked like a victim. "Give this to your lawyer, Merrick," she commanded. "Use it to negotiate with the IRS. Keep the house. Keep everything." "Mom," I started, stunned by this massive, lethal piece of ammunition she had just handed me. "What are you going to do?" "I am going home to pack 2 suitcases, Delphine said, standing up from the booth. "And then I am going to take you up on that offer for the spare bedroom. I am done." She walked out of the coffee shop, her head held high, leaving me sitting alone with the weapon that would permanently bury Orson Gallagher. 6 months later, the brutal Chicago winter had finally melted away, giving birth to a bright, vibrant spring. I stood on the spacious balcony of my new, sprawling penthouse apartment, gripping a warm mug of green tea, letting the morning sun wash over my face. The air smelled clean. The heavy, suffocating weight I had carried in my chest for decades was entirely gone. Behind me, the sliding glass door opened. My mother, Delphine, stepped out onto the balcony. She was wearing comfortable jeans and a sweater covered in dried clay. She had recently enrolled in a local pottery class, spending her days creating beautiful, imperfect bowls and vases. She looked 10 years younger. The anxiety lines around her eyes had smoothed out. She was finally living. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said, smiling warmly. "Good morning, Mom," I replied, wrapping an arm around her shoulder. A lot can happen in 6 months when you finally stop funding your own abusers. The massive estate in Oak Park had been listed and sold faster than anyone anticipated. The final sale price was $1,200,000. After Iron Oak LLC recouped the massive initial investment, plus 9 years of compounding penalty interest, I walked away with $850,000. Orson was left with essentially nothing. The black leather ledger my mother gave me was the ultimate checkmate. When Orson tried to hire a sleazy lawyer to fight the eviction, Merrick casually presented a few photocopied pages of the ledger to Orson's counsel. The lawsuit was dropped the very next morning. Orson is currently under a massive federal investigation for tax evasion. He lives in a tiny, run-down studio apartment on the far south side of the city. Fallon's boutique was liquidated. She is currently working 40 hours a week as a waitress at a chain restaurant, deeply humbled by the reality of minimum wage. Sutton had to declare personal bankruptcy and delete all her social media accounts due to the crushing debt and the overwhelming humiliation of her fake lifestyle being exposed. Neither of them speak to Orson. They blame him for everything. As for me, I am thriving. My career has skyrocketed. I own my space, my money, and my peace of mind. I walked back inside the apartment, setting my tea on the kitchen counter. Resting next to my laptop was a handwritten letter that had arrived in the mail yesterday. The return address belonged to Orson. I had opened it briefly. It was a pathetic, rambling letter begging for forgiveness, claiming he was sick, claiming he was a changed man, pleading with me to let him see my mother. I picked up the letter. I did not read the rest of it. I walked over to the heavy-duty paper shredder sitting under my home office desk. I fed the thick paper into the glowing slot, listening to the satisfying, mechanical grinding sound as his desperate words were turned into useless, unreadable confetti. Family is not a free pass to commit financial and emotional violence. Blood does not entitle someone to your soul. You cannot buy respect, and you certainly cannot buy love from people who only see you as a walking bank account. I learned that the hard way, but I finally learned it. So, I have a question for you all. As I watched my father's desperate apology turn into shredded trash, I felt absolutely nothing. No guilt, no sadness, just a profound, empty peace. Do you think I was too ruthless? Do you think throwing that letter in the shredder was too cruel? Or was it the exact, fair price he had to pay for 20 years of treating me like garbage? Let me know in the comments below. And if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to save your own sanity, share your story. You are not alone. Thank you for listening to my story. If you empathize with what I've been through, please like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to comment, "I'm Win," to let me know you've been with me until the very end. See you in the next stories.